welcome to the September edition of the Nonprofit Insights webinar series and the Best Practice Network webinar series. Today is a very special joint session because we are going to be talking about a 360-degree view of corporate nonprofit partnerships. And this means that we're going to be looking at these partnerships from both the nonprofit perspective and the corporate and company perspective. So it's going to give us a really great opportunity to see it from all sides because, as I'm sure many of you already know, it's a pretty complex issue and there are a lot of different factors involved and a lot of ways to be successful. And hopefully you'll hear many of them today. My name is Shari Ilton. I'm the Senior Online Communications Manager at VolunteerMatch, and I produce and host the Nonprofit Insights webinar series. So you'll be hearing from me periodically throughout the session, although what I'm most excited about is hearing from our speakers. Before we do that, a few important logistics. We will be sending you links to the full webinar recording and the slide deck after the session within about a week or a few days. So you don't have to worry about seriously taking notes, or if you miss something, you'll be able to go back and check it out later and share it with colleagues. So please just enjoy the webinar. If you have questions for our speakers, you can enter them into the chat box at the bottom right of your screen that you just found so successfully. We are also having a Twitter conversation that you can join using the hashtag VMLearn. And you can ask questions over Twitter as well. I believe that's it. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers. We have Mazarine Treyz, who is the author of The Wild Woman's Guide to Fundraising, which was called one of the top 10 books of 2010 by Beth Cantor, everyone's favorite nonprofit celebrity. Her second book is The Wild Woman's Guide to Social Media, which was published last year and given a 5-star rating by Joanne Fritz, who runs the awesome website nonprofit.about.com. Mazarine's latest book, Get the Job, Your Fundraising Career Empowerment Guide, was published this past April. And Mazarine has raised over $1 million for small, national, and international nonprofit organizations via grants, events, appeals, and more. So she knows what she's talking about. And Mazarine will be giving us an overall perspective on things today, as well as talking from the small nonprofit organization perspective. Our next speaker, Desiree Adaway, is a principal of the Adaway Group and has over 20 years of experience creating, leading, and managing international multicultural teams through major organizational changes in over 40 countries. Her deep level of expertise in fundraising, grant management, and environmental, social justice, and faith-based initiatives allows her to offer specific insights that help organizations like yours achieve consistent quality program results at the chapter, national, and international levels. And Desiree will be speaking based on her experience working with really large organizations. So we're going to be hitting both sides of the nonprofit spectrum today. Finally, with us here today, we have Amanda Lenaghan, who has a deep passion for connecting people with opportunities to use their talent to make an impact. She's the manager at the Charles Schwab Foundation, and she leads the employee volunteer strategy and is responsible for engaging Schwab's 13,000 employees in service. She has nearly a decade of experience in volunteerism, philanthropy, and nonprofit management. And prior to Schwab, she was the deputy director of Taproot Foundation, where she led their award-winning service grant program here in the Bay Area and advised companies on effectively engaging their employees and clients in service. She has a background that includes managing nonprofit fundraising campaigns that total about $10 million and leading community development programs in Ecuador. So Amanda is going to be speaking from the corporate perspective based on her experiences at the Charles Schwab Foundation. So now that we know a little bit more about our speakers and we're all excited to meet them, I want to quickly go over today's agenda because since we have so many great perspectives to cover, we want to make sure that you get as much out of the session as you possibly can. So first, each speaker is going to talk a little bit and set the context for you about today's webinar. And then we're going to launch into a discussion about finding and establishing partnerships between corporations and nonprofits, move on to how to run successful pro bono and skilled volunteering programs with nonprofit and corporate partners, and then finally move on to increasing the breadth and depth of these partnerships for maximum impact. So before we do that, I want a little bit of audience participation from you all. So I'm going to deploy a poll. This is just to learn a little bit about each of you. So if you could please answer the question. I'll leave it open for 30 seconds or so, and then we'll close it and we'll take a look at the answers. All right, I'm going to close the poll now. And let's see, can everyone see the poll results? Mazarine and Desiree, can you see the poll results?
Absolutely.
All right, so that's interesting. We've got mostly small nonprofits here, about 54%, but really a pretty diverse audience, which is pretty exciting. So I think at this point, let's launch right in, and we'll hear from our speakers. So, Mazarine, would you like to go first?
Sure. I'm still seeing the poll.
Yeah, sorry about that. Hold on one second.
Oh, sure. There we go. So thanks, everybody, for being here today. I have to just say, for those small nonprofits out in the audience, I feel you. I've been a one-person fundraising shop for just about my entire career, and I've also co-founded a nonprofit. So if you're starting a nonprofit, I know what that's like too. And today, I'm really excited to have this dialogue with Desiree, Adaway, Sherry, and Amanda Lenaghan, because I feel like we can all learn so much by getting these different perspectives and not just focusing on what we know. So without further ado, let's get going on the next slide. So you're really smart for being here today. Volunteers give 10 times as much as non-volunteers, if you didn't already know that, because they have that visceral connection with your mission. So your volunteer program is actually part of your fundraising program. And corporate volunteers can give so much more than the average donor. What do I mean by that? I mean, they can sit on your board, they can provide leadership, they can provide pro bono support to you, whether it's accounting or looking over legal documents or HR stuff, as well as helping you with Dollars for Doers programs and corporate grants, as well as just really being there for you in a lot of different ways. And the trick is, though, getting enough sort of manpower to support them in the ways that they need and make sure that they have a really good experience too. So how do you do that? Well, hopefully Desiree, Adaway, and Amanda will help come in and talk about successful experiences they've had. I'm going to talk about some not so successful experiences as well. And I think one of the biggest things I want you to take away from today is about communication and listening to what your corporate volunteers want. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So next slide, please. So as I said, they can get you sponsorships, they can get you cause marketing partnerships, they can become board members, and they can do Dollars for Doers campaigns. So corporate volunteers are huge. They are just huge for your nonprofit. And if you're wondering about how to get sponsorships or do cause marketing, they can help you with that too. But the place you need to start is just simply with asking them, you know, what are your strengths? What do you like to do? And then try to create an inspiring experience for them. Because a lot of times corporations won't even look at you unless you already have corporate volunteers engaged. So that means that you have to take it on yourself to reach out if you want to get a sponsorship to get corporate volunteers first. Next slide, please. Over to you, Desiree. Thanks.
All right. So I'm really happy to be with you guys today, and I just want to talk about volunteering, corporate volunteering, really from the perspective of what you guys can create together. So when you join forces, when your nonprofit joins forces with a corporate group, you can increase your impact, your influence, your income, and ultimately you get to change the world. And that's really why we're here. So great partners can do tremendous things for you. And if you want to change that slide, Sherry, that'd be great. But great partners do really tremendous things for your life and your business, right? And they help to make your life easier. They help them to open doors for opportunity. They help to multiply your income, and they help to get your back in times of challenge. They can be a source of tremendous anxiety and strife if partnerships aren't done right, and if not established kind of clearly and openly. Sherry, if you want to actually go 2 slides up, I think that'll take you to my slides.
Oh, actually, Desiree, I think that I accidentally put those slides you're referring to in the next section. I can.
No worries.
I can, if you'd like to scroll through. It's up to you.
Nope, we don't have to look at those right now. But for me, one of the things, the key points that I want to talk about is really making sure that you choose a partner who has your interests at heart and who is in sync with your mission and what you're trying to build, and making sure that you're in sync with theirs. Because partnerships are like bad relationships. You can be stuck with them for several years or months, and they can cost you thousands of dollars legally and in therapy bills. So you really want to be selective. You really want to make sure you're adding value to to the partnerships, to what you're doing, but also to what your corporate partner is doing. It really is a two-way street. So one of the pieces that, as you definitely are talking about larger organizations, is that first lesson is really creating the criteria for making that tough decision about whom and how you want to work with your corporate partners, and really thinking about who you want to entrust your name, your reputation, your brand with, because that's really important. And it's also about how folks, how the relationship can be mutually beneficial. Nobody wants a relationship that's one-sided. And so I just want to make sure we also think about the life cycle and what a relationship should look like, what that timeline should look like, and also really to emphasize every partnership ends, every relationship ends, and how are you guys preparing for working with these corporate partners and what happens when their priorities change and they go looking for something else, making sure that you're ready for that to happen. So if you want to go through, actually, Sherry, to a couple more slides. One more. One more. Okay, that's all I want to say right now. I'll pass it on to Amanda.
Thanks so much, and thanks to Sherry and VolunteerMatch for having us today. In my role managing our employee volunteer programs at Schwab, I get the really exciting opportunity to engage what is our greatest asset at Schwab, and that's our employees' talents and generosity in our programs and in communities and in working with all of you. So I'm hoping I can share some tips for how we've built some successful employee volunteer programs, but I also hope to bring an appreciation to those of you on the line who are in large or small nonprofits from my work at Taproot Foundation and also on the board of a small organization. I think we're all vested in really finding ways that volunteerism can build the capacity of your organizations, and then from a corporate perspective where we can really bring the strengths and expertise of our employees to the table. So just a word about the Charles Schwab Foundation. It was established about 20 years ago, but in the last decade we've really focused on leveraging our core strengths to address a significant gap in America, and that's the lack of financial education. So our mission is really about helping individuals and families achieve lifelong financial well-being, and we do that a number of ways, but today I'll be excited to share with you what we think are effective volunteer practices and hopefully bring to life a partnership that embodies some of what we'll be talking about today. So thanks again for having me.
Great, thanks. Thanks, everyone. Before we move on to the next, to the first topic, actually, which is finding and establishing partnerships, I'm going to deploy another poll. And this is another one to really just get to know each of you. So I'll leave it open for a few more, another 30 seconds or so. Oh, and there's been a request to define cross-sector, which is an excellent point. When I say cross-sector, I mean between nonprofits and for-profit companies. All right, a few more seconds. All right, I'm going to close it. And it looks like it's pretty even. So we've got an interesting split of people who currently have an established partnership and people that don't. So I think either way, you're going to learn something today about how to best find and form strong partnerships around volunteering. So let's get started with this first topic. I want to start out pretty general. So I'd like to ask each of the speakers, what are key challenges that your population faces, that nonprofits and corporations face from your experience in finding and establishing strong volunteer partnerships? And what are some tips that you've got for overcoming them? So Mazarine, do you want to get started?
Yes, please. Next slide. So in a small nonprofit, and one that I guess like about half of us here doesn't have any corporate partnerships currently, the question is, where do you look? Well, VolunteerMatch.org is a wonderful place to start. You can also look at idealist.org, campus2careers.com. The AARP creates a good website, and the Book of Lists as well. And if you don't know what the Book of Lists is, if you go to bizjournal.com, this is good for the U.S. and Canada. And you can go in and look at who are the most charitable companies in your greater metropolitan area. So even if you're not exactly within a city, this could be useful for you. It comes out every January, and it costs different prices depending on what metropolitan area you're in. It could be $50, it could be $75. But if you don't want to pay that much money, you can also go to the Foundation Center Cooperating Collection in your city or town, in your central library. And if you go to, I believe it's foundationcenter.org/collections, you should be able to find that. And there they will have it, and you can photocopy it for like 10 cents a page. So that's really useful to see what corporations are interested in volunteering and what specific causes they're interested in supporting. But the Foundation Center database itself also has a corporate search where you can see have they been funding a cause similar to yours in your area, and probably they have volunteers there as well, whether it's someone on the board or doing day-to-day stuff for the nonprofit. So these are some ways that small nonprofits can start to look for corporate partnerships that are offline. Next slide, please. So ask yourself, do you want corporate board members? Do you, I think there is some more writing on this. Sherry, can you, is there some, there we go, thanks. So you want to connect with the HR department of companies that support sister nonprofits, or connect with the CSR, which is Corporate Social Responsibility. And it depends on the size of the company. Depending on how big they are, they may have a CSR department, they may not. And some of them call it different things. Some of them call it community engagement, community involvement, corporate social responsibility. There's all different ways that people talk about how they want to get engaged with the community, but it's in their best interest to do so, because when their employees engage with you, it increases employee retention, And so that's a cost saver for them, as well as it makes them look better in the community. So they actually can help you, and it's good for their marketing. So part of the thing you want to do when you talk with a corporation is talk about not just helping them utilize their employees well, but also how you'd like to help promote the good that they're doing. Next slide, please. So when you start establishing partnerships, thanks, Sherry, what companies are physically closest to you? You want to look at that. If you're in a strip mall, start there. You know, a lot of times places like Starbucks, Old Navy, Kohl's, they'll give you $10 an hour per person who comes and help you with an event that you have. So just start where you are. And then you want to ask yourself, what are you offering in exchange for the company's help? So you're offering marketing, and you're also offering a way for them to feel good about using their skills with you. And ask yourself, what kind of help do you need? You know, do you want people to start making meals for your Meals on Wheels program? Do you want something else? And then how flexible are you about scheduling? Could they do this coming home from work? You know, that's why you want to look near you. See how convenient you can make it for the people to come and volunteer with you. I mean, the last thing you want is to introduce roadblocks and speed bumps in this partnership. And so you also want to ask, okay, what resources above and beyond people am I hoping to get? So if you want them to clean up a park for you, for example, or paint a fence for you, are you expecting them to bring their own paintbrushes and things? If not, if you are expecting them to do that, then you need to be clear about that up front. So you just want to think, all right, if they're going to help us and they're going to do some good with us, how can we help them feel good? And, you know, if we need something more, are we making that clear? Next slide, please. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about a less than successful partnership. This is making me think of it. So here on the left is one of the most cute cats that I've ever seen in my life. Her name is Olive. She's our cat. And this dog is a dog I don't know, actually. But this is talking about a partnership that we had when I was working at the Urban League of Portland. And we had a healthcare system come in for Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And here's me. I'm the dog. And I'm saying, I thought we were going to do a phonathon. And here's all the volunteers. They're saying, I thought we were going to do some tutoring. So that was my bad. That day, I thought I had communicated clearly with the volunteer coordinator for this healthcare system. But people came, and they were like, we don't want to do a phonathon. And we thought we were going to do some tutoring. And I was just like, why did you think that? You know, so you really have to be careful about how you communicate, over-communicate beforehand. And don't just talk to the coordinator. Communicate with individual volunteers if you can about what the volunteering day is going to look like, and make sure that people are okay with what you're proposing to do. And if they're not okay, then maybe have some alternate activities for them. Or you could send them a questionnaire saying, what do you consider your strengths? What would you like to do? Here are some of the things that we need to get done. I was talking with a nonprofit yesterday here in Portland, Oregon, where I am, that they're really good at engaging volunteers, but what they try to do is create an inspirational experience. And for a lot of people, dialing for dollars, doing phonathons is not an inspirational experience. It's something they want to run far away from. So if that's their first experience with your nonprofit, they're probably not going to come back. So if they want to have that inspirational experience, then you want to ask yourself, within reason, how can we provide that for them? So that's kind of a reframing. You know, it's not just about what we need, but how can we help this corporate volunteer feel the joy and the value in our mission, as well as doing something needed. So that's a cautionary tale. Next slide. All you, Desiree.
Sounds great. Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I want to make
sure.
Perfect. So I want to talk about partnerships from two perspectives. One, partnerships are about people. And when you're in a large nonprofit and you're working with a large corporate partner, it could feel like you're not really connecting. But ultimately, it's all about the people. And so I always tell people you want to think transformational rather than purely transactional when you're working with partners. And the first lesson is really about creating the criteria internally to make sure that you are partnership material. And this requires some really, some analysis, some self-analysis, and really looking at yourself, okay? So these are some of the key points that you really want to be thinking about as we are establishing how do we want to partner and what we want those relationships to be like. And ultimately, partnerships require vulnerability, right? So you have to make sure that you're creating a safe space so that you can kind of show your true self to your partner and that they can show them their true selves to you, because that is how you'll get to the next level. A great example of that is I was working with a large nonprofit, a global nonprofit, and we had a corporate partner who came to us, and they wanted us to do a program in some very clear cities that strategically worked for them. And we piloted in those cities. The reality is we kind of knew those were some of our weakest programs in those cities. We did it, and it failed. We then did a postmortem where we were more honest and said, you know, those are not our strongest cities. When we really lay out, this is the program you guys want, this is the kind of work you'd like us to do, let us show you where the real strong programming is happening. Can we pilot with your folks in those cities? They said yes, and it was an amazing successful program, and it went from a pilot, and it eventually led to them giving us $3 million a year for over a 3-year period. So partnerships require vulnerability. Make sure that you are showing who you really are and being honest about your ability. There's no cookie-cutter method for partnerships, right? You really have to have long conversation, make sure you understand why you're both at the table and the context and what you're trying to get out of it, right? You want to also make sure that you don't treat every partner the same. And this can get a little bit hairy as you become larger organizations. You know, there's some partners who got in, and honestly, they got to use our logo, our brand, and co-brand, and they probably have not paid as much, given us a larger donation or provided as many volunteers as other folks have. So you just have to be clear about how you will be bringing people in, and know that each member carries his or her own stories and baggage and limitations and gifts, and be willing to work with them. And it's really, again, meeting upon common needs. You want to make sure that it's a relationship that is built upon mutual trust, but also mutual benefit for all concerned. Next slide.
Desiree, before we move to the next slide, we had someone ask a great question, which is, can you elaborate on the goal you mentioned of being transformational as opposed to transactional?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So one of the things, so when I say, are you partnership material, I really mean that. Not every organization has the ability to share ownership, right? And that's what makes it from transactional to transformational. That's when you are really, true partnerships. You respect each other's working styles. You make sure you're a good strategic fit on both ends. You are clear and communicate what other commitments you have. You look beyond dollars to determine what success will look like, right? And you do your own internal work, right? You are very clear about how, about why you want a partner, right? So you can say what excites you about the idea. You are clear about partnerships that you've done in the past that have failed. You really want to think about long-term outcomes. So I just saw this great piece where someone said, oh, I can, you can do activities where you give people, you give you a fish, right? And that's just an activity. Maybe you come in and you help to feed someone, and you come in and you help to house someone. Or I can teach you to fish, and you're using your partners to really look at outcomes and talk about your relationship in terms of long-term investment in one another. And that's when it becomes transformational and no longer transactional. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Okay. So if you can hit the next slide. The other piece that we really want to be clear about is again, making sure we're selective about our partners. Be very selective, and sometimes we think that we can't say no, but we can, right? Not everyone will be a good fit. In fact, few people are going to be really good partners for you, but once you find them, it's magic and it's wonderful. And so quality is more important than quantity when it comes to partners, right? You should be adding value to one another. And it's very important that you figure out what you need and what you want from a partner before that partnership opportunity presents itself, right? Again, are you doing it because you want to partner with somebody for more money? Are you doing it because you want to build your audience and gain exposure? Or are you doing it because you want to set up an opportunity chain which will position you for growth in the future? Those are all legitimate reasons to partner. But for me, a partnership home run would include all three of those elements. So again, effective partners are asking the right question. They hold deep and meaningful conversations with each other. They do not ignore conflict, and this is what we always like to do, and I think sometimes, especially in the nonprofit world. We actually, if you see a problem happening, you, in a strong partnership, you're going to honor those differences, and you're going to honor the relationship you have, and you're not going to ignore things that are going wrong. And leadership is shared. If you have an organization that doesn't like to share, doesn't want to bring in new voices, that doesn't want to share the stage, that doesn't want to, that needs to dominate, the room, then you may not be a good partnership material, and you may want to look at other ways that you're going to work with corporate partners. The next slide, please. So I just want to briefly talk about the partnership life cycle. And I talk about this in a way because it's really, it goes in stages. And so the first stage is initiation. And this is where I ask nonprofits to spend the most of the time. It can take a year to build out a really good, strong partnership. It may take longer. But spend all the time you need to in the first couple of, in the initiation and design phase, because it'll make the rest of it go so much easier. So initiation, that's where the self-analysis happens. That's where you break down your criteria. Why are we here? What do we want to get? And it's where you determine the evaluation. Beyond dollars, what will our success look like? In the design phase, this is where you really want to think about what are we creating together, right? This is where you talk about what partners expect out of each other specifically and thoroughly. It's where you're making the choices about what you do and don't want to document, right? This is where the legal and the financial side of these relationships really happen, and this is where you have to spend that energy, because when that's ignored, or when things seem too complicated or too scary or too formal, this is when it comes back. I don't know about y'all, but that's every time it's come back and it's bit me in the butt, right? So you want to make sure that you have clear agreements between both sides, right? You want to create comprehensive and well-structured partnership agreements that help to plan for your success. And you want to be crystal clear about your mutual vision for what that includes, including an exit strategy. So during this phase, you want to make sure you describe what you're doing, you define it clearly, you develop it, and you implement it. The realization stage is where you're going to actually do the fun stuff. You're going to, engage the volunteers. You're going to have the program be implemented. And this is where all that hard work in the first two stages come to be. And this is where you ultimately have to produce with your partner. So you need to figure out what is it you're going to track, what systems will you be using. And you want to be as transparent as you can during this process. Does that mean you're going to be sharing databases and information and what that needs to look like? And again, reporting. We're transparent around reporting on how money is spent, how volunteers' time is being used, and other resources. And then the last piece is the maturing of it, and this is where partnerships are mature. So that partnership I mentioned before that we We started off as a pilot that wasn't so successful, that led to be a $3 million. They have signed on and continue to underwrite this program, now going into somewhere around its 6th or 7th year at $1.5 million a year. Now, this is the reality. Their priorities are changing for the corporate partner as well as for the nonprofit, right? Strategic planning has happened. Maybe what was important before is no longer important. So you always, always, always have to think out how will you phase out of a partnership and how will you terminate a partnership? Because just like a bad marriage, they happen. And you need to be ready and able to exit out of a partnership so that you can leave it in a really strong, loving, good way. So you want to make sure that you continue to keep your partners happy. You want to avoid those partnership killers, and there are plenty of things that can do to kill partnerships. And you want to execute your exit strategy and make sure that you guys both terminate the partnership feeling good about it. And you want to evaluate it and make sure it was worth it at the end. Next slide.
That's great, Desiree. I think I can jump in and hopefully bring to life some of the wonderful characteristics that you've shared for strong cross-sector partnerships. So I'd love to talk to you a little bit about Schwab's partnership with Boys and Girls Clubs of America. And this is a 10-year-long partnership, so hopefully I can bring to life a few elements that might share with you just how getting started and then a maturing relationship, what that looks like. So a few key points that I would just emphasize from a corporate foundation perspective in terms of what we're looking for in a great partner. We definitely look for a partner whose core strengths will complement ours and vice versa. So we want to bring something to the table that's really going to serve the need of your constituents, be an authentic experience, and certainly we're looking for organizations that have credibility with the population we're looking to affect. So Money Matters, Make It Count is a financial education program that Schwab actually co-designed with Boys and Girls Clubs of America. It teaches teens basic money management skills. And Boys and Girls Clubs have become a great partner of ours because they brought the knowledge and ability to really engage and inspire kids, along with the footprint of thousands of clubs across America. So that was really important to us. And when we took that and combined it with Schwab's financial acumen and our 13,000 employees, we really felt like we had a great formula to bring these teens the life skills that they needed to eventually, bring them more financial security. So we really worked closely to co-design the program curriculum, a scholarship program, and also create those meaningful opportunities to engage our employees in effective volunteer partnerships. So we're really happy to share that this is our 10th year of the partnership. We've had over 500,000 teens go through the program in 1,700 clubs across the country. So we really value that our partner cares about impact and that we share that value. So a few quick tips from my perspective in terms of how to create an effective employee volunteer component. I think the biggest tip is try and make it easy. We created standard online training and guidebooks for our employees. So on that end, we wanted to make it really easy. And then we also recognize in conversations and from kind of learning what works and what doesn't that employees really like to engage in different ways. So sometimes one size doesn't fit all. So we've had employees certainly deliver the curriculum as a facilitator of these workshops. We have had employees join as guest speakers. We've had them bring in scholarship winners to shadow them in their job and office. And then finally, we have employees serving on the boards of local clubs and really deepening the partnership locally. So I think being able to provide that breadth of different offerings has also been successful. And continuing to have candid conversations around where the real needs are. So this year, we're kicking off kind of fall programming, and before we recruit employee volunteers, we're asking our partner just to validate where the employees' skills and expertise and where those opportunities are really needed. Because that is what we've found really rings true in terms of where we can bring extra value to the partnership from our employees' perspective, and where they will have a great experience as if they feel as though they are having this transformational experience that Desiree alluded to.
Wonderful. So actually we have a couple of follow-up questions for you, Amanda. First of all, who initiated the partnership and the relationship between Schwab and the Boys and Girls Club? How did that get started?
Well, Schwab really took a strategic look at where our core competencies as a company could be brought to affect a social issue, and that's financial literacy and education in America. So when we look at the lack of savings, the lack of, or just the surmounting college debt, we really decided 10 years ago that that needed to be where we put the focus of our foundation. So that, in the sense of initiating a partnership, that really came from us in terms of saying this is what we want to do and how do we find the best in class out there in terms of the partners who can really help us make this happen.
And then you reached out to Boys and Girls Club to suggest the partnership?
I believe so. It's been going strong for so long that I'm sure we were working together in a less than formal way, but our partnership in the strategic sense evolved because we saw that there was a need that they had and something we were trying to address equally.
Great. One more question before we move on. You mentioned third-party evaluation to make sure that the program stays on track. How did you find and get that set up?
Well, I would say that in financial literacy and education, there's experts who actually take a look at are you creating meaningful long-term change. So that is something that is really specific to our field. But I feel as though what's important here is really just recognizing that both Boys and Girls Clubs of America and Charles Schwab Foundation were really invested in outcomes. So having that as a critical part of your shared value and focus in the partnership, I think, is what is really the critical component to think about.
Great, thanks. Okay, let's move on to the next topic, which is pro bono and skilled volunteering. Very hot right now, very valuable, very full of impact and engagement opportunity. So my opening question for this is really, what is so special about pro bono and skilled volunteering that makes it particularly relevant for this discussion about corporate nonprofit partnerships? And what are some tips for running successful pro bono and skilled volunteering programs? So we're actually going to stick with Amanda, and she's going to provide her perspective before we move on to Mazarine and Desiree.
I would say that one of the things that makes skills-based volunteering so special is that it really provides a triple win for everyone when it's done well. So as a nonprofit, hopefully you're either building your capacity through this type of volunteering, or you're really able to bring an additional value add to your constituents. We also see that employees and companies get a greater benefit and value out of an experience when employees are able to bring their expertise to the table, and when companies are able to see that is so rewarding in terms of leadership development opportunities for their employees, and what they're proud to do in the community. It really, I think, is that triple win that makes this so special. So from Schwab's perspective, when we thought about, how can we leverage all of our resources in support of our mission, we know that our employees and their talents are a critical component of that. So as I mentioned, our financial literacy program with Boys and Girls Clubs is a key way that we're doing skills-based volunteering. I also think it provides entree into other skills-based efforts like pro bono service and board service. So we've worked with a club, for example, on their marketing efforts. And as we've engaged employees in this kind of new way for us, we're seeing that it's a really easy way for them to plug in when they're playing from a a position of strength, bringing what they know best to the table in a new environment. And I think it's also a great way to deepen a partnership. So if you first become engaged with someone and you learn about their skill set and then are able to draw from that strength of theirs, they're going to get more engaged with you, and hopefully as an organization you're going to be benefiting even more from that. I would also say from my experience at the Taproot Foundation, I know firsthand that professionals are really clamoring for this opportunity to use their expertise in volunteer service. So the question for them is typically, as an individual or as employees, where do I find this opportunity if it's not formally offered from my company? And just validating that, in fact, you really do want to use my skill set or it's helpful to you as a nonprofit. So I think being able to articulate your needs as an organization and understand where that volunteer talent can really be maximized is critical. I often encourage development committees to think about your nonprofit needs not only in the sense of cash to meet your budget, but where some of your budget line items may be answered by pro bono service or consulting or other resources. And taprootfoundation.org has some great resources that can help you in terms of identifying your need for pro bono projects and scoping them out. So I highly recommend that. And then hopefully all of you have been familiar with or will be familiar with what LinkedIn is now offering, and that's they have a component to their LinkedIn for Good program now that allows nonprofits to use advanced search capabilities to find professionals and send them emails. And just a few weeks ago, they launched the ability for individuals to signal on their profile that they would like to do a skills-based volunteering project or that they would like to join a board. So as you're kind of looking for who to work with, I think that's a great new resource that you can now see in individuals' volunteering and causes sections of their profiles. I also think from the corporate perspective that, there's so many employees, and if you don't have a formal board matching program, which many companies don't, it's a great way to refer your employees to be able to share with their networks that they're looking to get engaged in that way.
Great, wonderful. Wow, so much information. So I want to do a quick time check. Obviously, we only have 10 minutes left in our hour-long webinar, and we have so much more to talk about. So never fear, it seems like we're going to have to do a follow-up webinar and some other resources for all of you. The questions coming in have been unbelievable. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to hear from Mazarine and Desiree about pro bono and skilled volunteering, and then we'll end the webinar on the hour as planned, and you'll be hearing from us about follow-up sessions and other resources that will help get your questions answered. So we won't leave you hanging, I promise. So for now, let's move on to hear more about pro bono and skilled volunteering.
Thanks a lot, Sherry. So I just wanted to say in reference to what Amanda was talking about, absolutely, it has to make sense from the corporation's perspective, and if you can provide financial literacy as part of your mission, then maybe a partnership with Charles Schwab would be something you would want to look at further. So always look at what the corporation is known for when you think about what sort of pro bono or skilled volunteering you need, because it would make sense for them to do financial literacy. That's what they're about. So this particular slide that I'm going to talk about now is coming from a friend of mine who has over 15 years of volunteer management experience, and she has done this professionally for many years now. She's doing this for a major city, and what she does is she actually tries to get pro bono volunteers a specific kind of person. So for example, if she wanted to get women who are of African-American descent who are lawyers on her volunteer team, she said this is how she does it. She uses the email network of people who are that kind of person. And then she says, hey, I bet you know some other people who are like you. Would you please pass out this opportunity to them? And that really works. she says. And then she said she reminds them through emails and follows up consistently with them. And then she highlights the high-level nature of the role. So that means that she talks about the networking opportunities and how they're really going to meet some elected officials and get a chance to be in a government building. So those are some of the things to consider when you're looking at someone who is a profession in service, a white-collar profession. Next slide, please. Desiree, this is yours.
It's me. Yeah. So very briefly, so we at least have 5 minutes sharing for any questions or to wrap up. But just really what I've always worked, and in the past, my history is I ran volunteer engagement for a very large organization where we engaged about a million volunteers a year via strategy and via my department, thousands of volunteers a year. And so pro bono and skilled volunteering was one of the key elements that most corporate partners would talk to us about as we were building out relationships with them. And so for me, I would then go back to some of our countries and some of our programs and clearly define the work of what we needed these volunteers to do, right? And to make sure we had clear, concise, detailed job descriptions for the work that we needed done. And then we would set expectations with these volunteers. We would share job plans and be very clear about the things we needed done, having clear project plans as well for them to help to get the work done. Have honest discussions about work and the working relationships and how it fit with our culture and the culture of the groups that they were going to be supporting. And then we would take the time and find the perfect match. And so in finding a pro bono and skilled volunteer, it's just like hiring, right? You want to take a long time to hire, and then if it's not working, you want to end that as soon as you possibly can. So we would, like Mazarine talked about, we would advertise appropriately and make sure that we knew what we were looking for and that we were going to the right networks to find that. And much like what Mazarine said, it's that kind of networking strategy of who are the 10 biggest networkers or folks who are connected in that community, then that's where we would go to looking for these highly skilled volunteers. And we would match their skills and desires and interests with that position. Again, it's not just about us. It's also what they wanted and what they wanted to learn and what they wanted to get better at. And we looked at their personality type. Culture matters. Culture matters, and making sure people fit in and are welcome was a big part of making sure these volunteers were successful. We would give them ownership over the work, and we would recognize their work as a volunteer in numerous ways. And sometimes one of the greatest things we ever did was just send a random email to folks' employers and say, you may not know this, but you know what? Sherry has been volunteering with us and getting, pro bono for 2 years now, and we just want to let you know what kind of great people you have working for you. And then we would always evaluate the position, evaluate the partnership, and make sure that we have the right people doing the right job for us on a regular basis and giving them feedback, because that's what professionals do for other professionals. And then we would adjust as necessary.
Wonderful, thank you. So yeah, you know what? We do have time for one question, and I'm going to go with the majority here. We had a bunch of people talking, asking questions about the finding and establishing partnerships, and specifically for small nonprofit organizations. Since most of our audience are from small nonprofits, how can a locally based tiny organization approach the, what sometimes feels like a pipe dream of partnering with a company? What are some strategies? And I would love to hear very briefly from each of you, from your perspectives, and especially Amanda too, from a company perspective, how are ways that nonprofits can get it in if they don't know someone, and make the case that this partnership can be great, even though it's a tiny organization.
Amanda, I would love to hear your perspective on this.
Sure, I can start. So from my perspective, as a company, we're really excited that our employees are engaged in the community and that they find a passion and bring that and share it with their colleagues. So I think the best thing you can do as a small organization is kind of look at who you're already working with, who's volunteering for you now, and what does their network look like. So if you already are engaging a volunteer, maybe just one person, we've seen that those kind of grassroots movements in terms of where individuals are excited really can get other colleagues and eventually a corporate partner to really learn about your cause and what you're doing. So my biggest tip is to work with the relationships that you are building, and if you connect with whether it's a board member or kind of a one-off volunteer, and eventually build that relationship, it can grow into something that leads you, to a small or large company.
I like that, and I would add that if you have no volunteers right now, or if you have very few and you're not even sure where to start finding volunteers, some of the links I shared in the beginning of the presentation will be helpful for you. There's also a couple of other things I could say. There's other websites I could lead you to in terms of looking at who might be interested in your cause. But creating those one-on-one connections is the place to start. And if you're not already doing speaking engagements for your nonprofit, I'd highly encourage you to do that and start. Even just talking to the HR department at a local corporation and saying, hey, could we come in and do a lunchtime talk about what our nonprofit does, just to get your foot in the door. If you're a performing arts nonprofit, maybe you could do a small performance. I used to work at an orchestra down in Austin, Texas. I talked with this guy who worked at 3M, and he was the corporate social responsibility guy, and I sidled up to him at a networking event, and I said, hey, and he's like, hey, and he looked at me like, what does she want? And I said, hey, could we come and play for you on the lunch hour? He's like, I thought you were going to ask me for money. And I said, no, we just want to come play for you. And he's like, that's a great way to get your foot in the door. So don't start with the ask. Start with giving them something. And it could just be the chance to listen to what you do, share your story, and maybe have a chance to make a difference. So, don't approach it transactionally, as Desiree said so eloquently. Really think about long-term. Start to reach out in terms of your own passion for the mission with just a speaking gig. I would start there.
And you guys are way smarter than I am. I would just add a couple of things. Some of you may have heard the phrase, your network is your net worth. Make sure you have a diverse and full and rich network that you're working with. And I always like to talk about any volunteer experience to have three components: education, activation, where they're actually doing, and then advocacy to follow up. And make sure built into that advocacy, into that follow-up strategy is them sharing their stories with other folks and them asking, hey, who in your network would love to know about us, and can you make introductions?
Great. Thank you all so much. So I'm going to quickly scroll through, and you're going to get a glimpse of what would have been the last part of this webinar. Clearly, we could spend an entire day talking about this, and unfortunately, we're out of time. So I'm going to wrap up. Before I do, when you sign out of this application, there's going to be a one-question survey, and we would love it if you would answer it. It just will give us an idea of how valuable today's session was for you and what you learned. So please do take 30 seconds to answer that. Next month's webinar is on October 16th. It's another joint session with our corporations and our nonprofits. And it's about the overhead myth. So if you've watched Dan Pallotta's talk, you know what I'm talking about. It's about the problems facing the nonprofit sector when it comes to funding and funding overhead and operations. And we'll be hearing from Jacob Harold, the CEO of GuideStar, and Ann Goggins-Gregory from the Bridgespan Group, as well as VolunteerMatch's own president, Greg Baldwin. And you can find out more about that soon on learn.volunteermatch.org. So again, huge thank you to Mazarine, Desiree, and Amanda. This was unbelievable. And to all of you attendees, thank you for being so engaged and so interested. And we will be scheduling a follow-up. And I have ideas percolating in my head about other ways that we can get your questions answered and create resources for all of you around this topic. So stay tuned on that. We will be sending a follow-up email within a few days with links to the webinar slides and the webinar recording. So no worries there. And I think that's it. So thanks again to our wonderful speakers and to all of you, and have a great day.
Thank you.